Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 31 of the Fair Housing Insiders, another amazing topic. Today, we are going to be discussing drive-by accessibility. We are honored to have with us again, Leslie Tucker. Leslie, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Jonathan.
Nice to have you with us again. We always appreciate your insights and a very important topic. So we appreciate everyone being here today. Make sure you give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. To get us going, before we get into some really interesting images to kind of help our audience understand the do's and the don'ts and what accessibility should look like, what's your take, Leslie? Can you give our audience kind of an idea, like what is drive-by accessibility and what do property management companies need to pay attention to?
All right. So drive-by accessibility testing is fairly common now. We're seeing lawsuits pop up all over the country that are based on drive-by testing. And essentially what it is when an individual or individuals gets into their car, drives to a community, a property, drives by the property or even kind of into the property, takes some pictures of accessibility non-compliance, and then files a lawsuit or a complaint based on those features that are not compliant with accessibility laws. It's extremely easy. It doesn't take very long. And these individuals don't even need to have applied to the property. They don't need to really have wanted to live there. Mm-hmm. They're still allowed to file a lawsuit if you have accessibility non-compliance issues that are visible from the outside. These testers can be just regular individuals that are disabled, that have opted to, spend their time doing this. Some people make their living off of these settlements. These individuals are usually teamed up with an attorney who in turn, makes their living off of doing these types of cases. These testing efforts can be also done by advocacy groups, state agencies. When agencies are involved, they're typically targeting, companies with multiple properties in an area, so they can file, much larger suits. But either way, this is going to end up costing companies a lot of money when all is said and done, whether it's just one property or whether it's, a big chunk of their portfolio. If a lawsuit is filed, and really why this episode is so important and why, we're talking about it and trying to educate you on this topic is a lot of these suits are absolutely avoidable, and not for a lot of money, to fix issues that may be looming, that you may or may not be aware of, that are in and around your property. If a lawsuit is filed against your company, basically what happens is the plaintiff, the person who's filing the lawsuit against you, gets to then do an inspection of your entire property. Oh, so it started out as, a simple issue that was not compliant, maybe in front of your leasing office or something, has now, opened you up and opened your entire property up for inspection. So when all is said and done, most companies have to settle these cases. And you're going to have to pay to, correct all the problems that are identified. You're going to have to pay damages to the tester. And then you're going to have to pay their attorney's fees as well. So these cases end up costing companies a lot of money. And so, what we're trying to educate you on is how to avoid these very, very expensive suits.
Yeah. Very detailed. We're so glad to have you on share your experience and what you're dealing with clients on a regular basis. So that really helped our audience and our community out. We appreciate your explanation of that. So why don't we just take a few minutes now that you've really explained, what the challenge is and what drive-by accessibility testing is. Let's look at some examples, and we'll have you pick out, okay, what's right, what's wrong with them. So why don't we take a look at our first illustration?
Sure.
So Leslie, what's your take on this property here?
All right, Jonathan. Well, just at first glance, this would be a great property for a drive-by tester to pull up to because there's a huge glaring problem right off the bat. And that problem is there are no accessible spaces in the lot of this leasing office. The general rule is that if a leasing office provides any parking for the public, and really, all leasing offices do. They don't have to, but pretty much all leasing offices do provide some parking for the public visitors. There has to be at least some accessible spaces. Mm-hmm. There's a certain number that is required, and that's really one accessible space for every 25 public spaces is required. And that's an ADA rule. The reason the ADA applies to this leasing office and every leasing office is because a leasing office is an area of public accommodation. They are intended for members of the public to come visit. Right. And so is the leasing office parking lot. So both of those spaces are covered by the ADA. The other law that you may have heard of that pertains to accessibility is the Fair Housing Act, the FHA. Most people have heard about this law. It doesn't apply to every property out there. It only applies to properties that were built after March of 1991. A lot of people know that, some people don't. But for those kind of newer properties, the FHA applies to your units, your common areas, your amenities, your parking, your leasing office, really everywhere in your property, the FHA applies. And those accessibility requirements apply to all of those spaces. The ADA, unlike the FHA, applies to every property, regardless of when it was built. So even if your property is, older, it was built in the 70s or the 80s, before the FHA accessibility standards existed, your expectations to abide by accessibility requirements in your leasing office and in your leasing office parking, they still exist. It doesn't matter when your property was built. It doesn't matter how many times it's been bought or sold or renovated or changed management. That requirement is still there. So you can't kind of fall back on, well, I have an older property, so you can't expect me to, have all the accessibility standards met. That's just not going to fly if a drive-by tester comes and finds non-compliance and files a lawsuit. Right.
All right. Very good. Nice explanation. Appreciate that. Liked how you referenced the American Disabilities Act, the Fair Housing Act, the timestamps on when these were, when they came about, what types of buildings. And we have a wide variety. We appreciate all of you, all of our audience, whether you're a new property management company or you've been around for a while. We're grateful that you tune into this show for this excellent education. So please remember to give us a thumbs up. So that leads us to our next property, a next illustration. So let's take a look at that. So Leslie, what's your take on this property here?
Well, this property includes an accessibility issue that I see all the time at a lot of inspections that I've done. And that is that there are accessible spaces. We see them. There are two right next to each other. But there is no access aisle for the accessible spaces. That's a non-compliance issue. There's also no signage on the spaces. The main problem is that if a drive-by tester drives by and sees this issue, which again, I see all the time, it's very common. A lot of companies believe that if you slap some paint and a symbol on a space, then that automatically just transforms it into an accessible space. And that's unfortunately not correct.
Right.
So if a drive-by tester sees this issue, not only is it going to make them, drive into your property and take pictures of it, but it could also, potentially cause them to inquire more, drive around the rest of your property and take pictures of the rest of your common areas. Whereas if the entrance to your property was already compliant, it wouldn't have tipped them off that there may be other accessibility issues elsewhere. So they may just have bypassed you thinking that you have an accessible property.
Very good. Thank you so much. Yeah. Lots to consider with this particular situation, and great explanation. We appreciate that. So takes us to our third and final property. So let's take a look at this image now. Okay, Leslie, what do you think about this property?
All right. So on this property, I actually saw some issues that were compliant and a couple that weren't. The first thing I noticed was this property had an accessible space, and it also looked like it was van accessible, which is required under the ADA, at least one at the leasing office. So that was a good thing. The van accessible space had an access aisle. It also had signage. So those were some good things. The issues that I saw that were problematic was that there was no curb cut at the access aisle. So someone in a wheelchair using the access aisle would have no means of getting up onto the sidewalk over the curb. That's a problem. And then there's no kind of accessible pathway from the access aisle curb cut to the entrance of the building. So, sorry, without getting too kind of overly technical and specific, right. This property, while at first glance may look like it was in compliance, it's actually not. But keep in mind that the issues that I just identified, a curb cut from the access aisle up onto the sidewalk, is not an expensive fix. It's really pretty easy. And it's like I said, it's just not expensive. So identifying that issue and fixing it could completely eliminate a drive-by tester from coming into your property and targeting you with a lawsuit, which will drag out and be very expensive when it could have been fixed, for, I don't know, a couple $1,000s. So, how do you avoid these? What should you do if you think you may have compliance issues? Mm-hmm. I would recommend hiring some type of accessibility consultant, an attorney, someone that with knowledge of your accessibility requirements, to come out and take a look. I know that we've been talking about your leasing office and your leasing office parking, mainly because those are the areas that are primarily targeted by drive-by testers. That's going to tip someone off as to whether your property may have compliance issues. And those issues may, cause them to kind of dig deeper into what issues may exist at the property. But it's really also important to get the rest of your property checked out too, especially if you are one of those properties that are covered by the Fair Housing Act, constructed after March of 1991. Right. Because violations elsewhere on your property, ramps, entrances to your pool, gym, anything like that, those are also violations of the law. Those can also, they can be filed by guests or residents or testers that are coming to, take a tour of your property. Anyone can identify those issues. So if your residents and guests and testers can identify those accessibility issues, you should too. You should know about them before anyone else does, and have a plan to correct them as soon as possible. And I know that thinking about these community-wide issues can be overwhelming, and they can be expensive if there are kind of widespread compliance problems. But we do encourage you to at least have a plan to correct them, and to, at the very, 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 very least, look at the issues that are visible from the outside to keep those easy drive-by testing suits at bay.
Right.
You can avoid them very easily. And a lot of times, like I said, correcting them doesn't have to be expensive or burdensome.
Yeah, it's like the low-hanging fruit, it sounds like, right? This is the stuff that's it's right there. Just take care of it. Yeah, thank you so much. And great visuals for our audience too, to help them kind of take a look and, what does my property look like? Oh, I've got some things I need to go out and take a look at, and so many different things to think about from an inspection perspective. And it'll be nice for our community. Just know that we have a course coming that's going to be very, very detailed about inspections and accessibility and what you need to keep in mind. So that will be coming very soon with some other courses as well. So Leslie, thank you so much. I mean, what great insights on, what can we do today? Easy things, just go out, walk your property and make sure that you're compliant, and talk to someone, an attorney or a consultant, who will be able to help you with that, to make sure that you're protected against drive-by testers that could be happening. So thank you so much. Episode 31 of the Fair Housing Insiders. Man, it's been an amazing year. We're wrapping up 2021. We appreciate everyone. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Thank you for sharing this complimentary education that we provide. Leslie, thank you again for being on our show. We always enjoy having you as a guest, and we'll see everyone on our next episode. Take care.